You are listening to Bridging the Gap, the podcast where we talk about businesses going global with the help of localization.
Stay put to meet the marketing, product, and software experts that make brands international.
And learn strategies to speak your customer's language. Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Bridging the Gap. This is your host, Marta Coloma, and today we're going to talk about accessibility and localization. This is a topic that we often forget to touch on, but that is crucial for millions of individuals globally. In fact, 1 in 5 people in the world live with some type of hearing loss, according to the WHO. To discuss this, we have Sally Chalk with us today in our virtual studio. Sally is one of the co-founders of Signapse, a pioneering AI-driven language translation platform founded in the UK and associated with the University of Surrey. Hello, Sally. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me here today. What we do at Signapse is translate all the words into sign language for deaf people using AI. That's our big vision. We're 2 years old. And in 2 years, we've grown to equity of £2 million. We've got 20 staff. On a really busy day, we're doing about 200 videos. And our vision is to use AI to translate what we're doing.
Wow, that's a very ambitious idea. I was wondering, how did you come up with it, and what is your relationship with the deaf community?
So I really like building organizations for people with disabilities in ways that are quite disruptive. I've never been one, if someone says I can't do something or no, it won't work like that, to kind of accept the status quo. And I've been watching the AI space for about 20 years now, whether it could be used to transform access for deaf people. And I think 2 years ago, I sort of was watching the space and realized that finally the tech was ready to be able to sort of tackle this very difficult challenge. In terms of my personal interest, I trained as a social worker for deaf people and cut my teeth in the deaf clubs, one in Cambridge, and feel that I'm sort of very much part of the deaf community in the UK.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about the case studies of that Synapse deals with regularly, can you tell me a little bit about the kind of companies and institutions do you serve? What is the most common scenario you deal with?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. The companies we deal with a lot are educational technology companies. So we're looking for companies that have products at scale. So they need lots and lots of work doing. We're not replacing humans. So we're not looking for like hospitals or court cases or police stations. We're not looking to put our AI product there. We're looking to use it in situations where it just wouldn't happen otherwise. So we're not replacing people. Educational technology is a great case for that because they have lots and lots of videos that they need translating, and they need it to be at a price that's appropriate to their budget as well. But we have some great and really good fun first champions, some of them being the airports in America that at a very early stage came along and said, look, we want to make our spaces accessible using sign language. And we've also had some media companies from Canada as well that have been very early adopters. So you can find our products in sort of public spaces, for media companies and also for video production companies.
Wonderful. I see there are many use cases in transportation. Is that like a hot sector where you're digging your claws in?
Well, transport's great because the languages that are used in the transport sector is much more limited than that is used in a conversation like this. So, I mean, everyone's linguists. So you'll know a conversation like this could use up to 1 million words, and the conversation could veer off in any direction. So you would need AI that could predict where it was going to veer off to. Whereas in transport, it's very predictable. There's only a certain number of stations, a certain number of trains, a certain number of things that can go wrong with that train. There's actually 900 things that can go wrong with trains, but they're all predictable. So it was quite an easy place to start, both for the train sector in the UK and the airport sector in America.
So before we talk a little bit more about accessibility and localization and how you use accessibility features in everyday life, I wanted to ask you about some basic facts about sign language and all the universe of accessibility, because so many people don't really know how that works. They don't know if there's one type of sign language, of if there are several. They don't know how you can use it in your everyday life, and what are the needs of the deaf community. So can you tell me a little bit about how these languages work? They reflect a specific culture, and they are not only one, right?
No, there's 320 different sign languages in the globe.
Wow.
So, like wherever you find a spoken language, there will also be a sign language that matches that. And I personally think it's really interesting because you can follow the migrations of people around the globe through sign language. So, American Sign Language, British Sign Language is on two hands. American Sign Language is on one hand when you do finger spelling, and also French Sign Language is on one hand when you do finger spelling. And that's because there was a lot of French people that came over to America when it was first colonized, and they brought their sign language with them. The same with Australia. So British and Australian Sign Language are quite similar, really, because of all when we sent the criminals over to Australia, and we took our sign language with them. But as the nations are growing apart, you can also see that the sign languages are growing apart as well. So you can map the patterns of global changes in the changes in sign language as well. People get really frustrated. I know, someone said to me, they said, like, it just makes sense for it just to be all one language, and they almost got cross at people for just having more than one sign language, and it's like, it's just the way it is, really, and it's as diverse as humans.
Today we have someone here who's Václav Hodek. He's our CEO at Localazy, and he actually has a close relationship with sign language, and he's also learning some kind of sign language. In this case, it's Czech sign languages. I don't know, Vasek, if you can tell us a little bit about your journey with accessibility and learning sign languages.
Yes, I have a kind of close relationship because my partner, she was born with a genetic disease called Usher syndrome, and it heavily affects hearing and vision. And at this moment, she already lost 96% of her hearing. So without hearing aid, it would be really complicated. But in most of the cases, we are able to communicate just fine. And in some occasions when the environment around is noisy or there's a lot of people around, we resort to the sign language. And I'm really proud of her because she grew up between hearing people. She was never part of the deaf community, and now as an adult, she has decided to help those people actually. So she worked as a consultant for social rehabilitation of deaf people, helping them with visiting doctor, with finding new job, and other things that are pretty hard in their normal lives that we don't even consider challenge. And she started to learn sign language only a few years ago to actually help those people, not because she needed that. And it was amazing because I really love it. I love the localization. That's why we are doing Localazy, helping people to translate things to different languages. And sign languages are really interesting topics. So I immediately fall in love, and I'm already learning Czech sign language for 1.5 years at this point. And I'm kind of able to use it for normal communication.
That's amazing. Sally, I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about the hurdles that people in the community have in their day-to-day life, accessing contents, products, services. How would you define accessibility, and what is needed to make a product accessible?
I think the hurdles now are mainly to do with attitude. So it is complex. If someone says I need a sign language interpreter, it's not an easy fix. You know, you need to do your research, you need to find out how to do it, you need to make sure you budget for it. And I just think, in my experience, the organizations that I've seen that have like really strong champions within them, in their access departments, that are going, yeah, you know, let's get this right for people, let's get this right for our patients, or let's get this right for our users. They will push things through and they will make things happen. And in this day and age, it is easy to do. Whereas if you have an organization that's overly bureaucratic, or has people that aren't that bothered, or has people that are arguing internally amongst themselves, then that access won't happen. So it's not so much now about, are the tools there, but it's more about the organizations have the attitude to change and make things happen, I would say.
That makes sense. Bashek, I don't know if you agree. Have you had the same experience? There are the tools, but we don't have we need the attitude to implement them.
Yes, I completely agree, and I would add that accessibility is not just about those people that need those tools to be, for example, able to understand or navigate them something in their lives, but you also need some kind of understanding from the other side, from people without this problem. One of the issues I know about is, for example, visiting a doctor, because today for deaf people or people with some conditions that make this visit harder for them, can use an assistive technology. It's not a problem to bring a tablet with the interpreter who can translate to the sign language, for example, or use tool just like a Signapse, but the doctors are really not used to it. They are against it, they don't like it, they don't know what to do, they don't know who they should speak to. They typically trying to speak to the interpreter, but you are not supposed to do that, and so on. So integrating the accessibility tools or into the society need both sides, not only disabled people that need the help, but also us.
I'd 100% agree with that. Really, it sounds like we both agree that the tools are there now. It's just about getting the will to try them out, isn't it? Really. I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I think big things that happen in the world can have a big impact. So during lockdown, that changed a lot of people's attitudes. There's the product that Václav referred to used to have low take up before lockdown, and then when lockdown happened, like, people had no choice. They were like, you have to use this because it's the only way to get access. So we had 2 years of using like remote interpreters, and then after that it was like business as usual, really. So it's kind of like, sometimes you need seismic events to make a really big change, but it feels like we're all pointing in the right direction really now. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
Me too.
We will talk about the future in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, Sally, in this day and age, we are all talking all the time about user experiences, digitally and physically. And I was wondering, what are the pain points in the user experience of a person who's deaf or who's part of the deaf community? How does it look like, and what are the kind of pain points they can pinpoint to the companies? You know,
it's the same as I said previously. It's attitude. You know, there's a lot of examples of people still using children to translate for them. And you know, if you're a child with, say, a doctor, and the doctor's giving out quite sort of critical or personal information about your parent, to be a child in that situation is quite a difficult position. Well, a very difficult position to put them in. So it's about education and saying it's not acceptable to be using children for translation. You know, you need to be using technology or people. So I'd say attitude was kind of one of the biggest pain points, really. And then I used to have people say that, oh, you can't, you know, we can't find an interpreter. And it's like, well, yeah, you can actually, because there are, you know, 1,000 of them, and then you have all these other tools at your fingertips as well. So that's the pain point. And these things have like an enormous impact on people's lives. So like the cancer diagnosis, late stage cancer diagnosis for deaf people is like far higher than it is for hearing people. There's absolutely no need for that. Reading age is far lower than for hearing people. And again, there's no need for that. And employment status again is far lower if you're a sign language user. And again, that in this day and age, there's those tools there should be some equality in employment status. So it has a massive impact on people.
Mm-hmm. You actually mentioned the children of deaf adults, which is an interesting topic at hand. I was wondering how accessibility or the lack of accessibility impacts them. And you already said that they are normally used as interpreters, right?
They can be, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I generalize and say usually, but they can be, and I think that's personally a very difficult position to put someone in.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Vasek, if you had anything to add here. I know you have a little bit of experience with that too.
No, I completely agree with Sally that basically if we are talking about those children of the deaf adults, it's very hard for them. They need to really grow up really fast because they serve as interpreters for their basically parents. And I know a few stories about those kids, and some are to us maybe a bit scary because imagine that you are a small girl and you need to interpret for your mother while visiting a doctor, and you can imagine that visiting a normal doctor can be okay, but there are also some type of doctors where you don't want to be as a kid. And I would definitely recommend there is a very recent movie called Coda, and it nicely describes this kind of issue, and it's actually very accurate on the topic. So really worth watching if you want to know a bit more about what these children must go through.
Mm-hmm. Guys, I wanted to touch on the points that localization and accessibility have in common, especially because I was wondering, localization is actually inherently about accessibility because you're accessing other person and talking to them in their language, right? What can you say about this? Do you see the connection?
Yeah, 100% from my point of view. It's sign language is another language. It's inherently more difficult to use AI to translate it. Spoken languages, French, German, Czech, they're two-dimensional. So they're represented as a sound wave. If someone is speaking, that's what you're translating using large language models. It's just sound waves, it's just two-dimensional. Whereas sign language is because it involves movement of your whole body from your torso upwards, your face, your eyebrows, your cheeks, everything is kind of like the position of your body. It's three-dimensional. So having to move from two-dimensional to three-dimensional is difficult by orders of magnitude, which is why it's one of the last languages that's being translated using AI. But in terms of where it fits beautifully amongst other languages, really.
Sally, actually, I think that so many people that are listening might be wondering how do you use AI to translate and make this content accessible, and how has AI evolved in the last few years to make this possible?
So at the moment, we're at the start of the journey. As I said, we've been using it in the transport space very successfully. And now we're moving on to that kind of much more free flowing translation that we're starting out. We are using it with some of our clients, and we've had sort of good results so far, but we're quality checking everything as we're going out. So it's not instant. I was using a image creator video the other day, and I did it in 4 seconds, and I felt impatient. I was like, come on, it's got to be faster than this. So it's at the moment we're still quality checking the work that we're getting out. It's really important that what we do is alongside the deaf community and kind of with their gift and their blessing. And their buy-in as well. So we're making sure that we're working in lockstep with people, which is why we're not just pushing stuff out and making sure that the quality of it is good enough. But it's starting, and I think we're about 12 months ahead of where we wanted to be. So we're very pleased with progress. And as I said, it's for those kind of like mundane, routine sort of translations that just would not happen if it was done using people.
So you have a quality assurance team in the same way a localization team might have a QA department.
Yeah,
can I ask a question? I wonder, at least for the Czech Sign Language, the grammar of the sign language is completely different from the normal spoken Czech language.
Yeah.
Like extremely different, I would say. Is AI today able to adapt the sentences from, let's say, plain English into the grammar of the sign language?
Yeah, we use, that's a really good question. We use something called glossing that is a kind of like a coded form of the sign language. So we would take a sentence and then we would gloss it, and then we use the glosses to turn it into sign language. But we're also using something called Gloss Plus that is taking the small nuances and the large grammatical differences and sort of moving it up to the next level, really. So you're moving from something called sign supported English, that's just a word for word translation, to actual true sign language. That's what we're working on now.
So is this a specific large language model you're using for sign language, or do you take from different LLMs? I'm wondering.
We're using the same recipe that the LLMs have used, so that it's great that we've kind of like waited for so long, because all the lessons that Czech to English to Czech have learned in terms of LLMs, we're able to use that, use those lessons and apply the models. We've found it remarkably easy so far.
Yes, it's amazing because I'm sorry, Marta. It's amazing because for the sign language, at least I was looking for it in the Czech language, and there is not much resources available, like different sentences. We have some, of course, in our learning courses, but in general, there is not so much information on the grammar available.
Would you say, Sally, that this is the same situation we have with LLMs right now, where there are like low resource languages and languages with more resources? Would you say that ASL and VSL, which are the languages, the sign languages you work with, have more resources to create the system?
We've created our own data set. So we've not needed to be reliant on large data sets, and the onset of OpenAI and ChatGPT 3.5 have meant that we're able to leverage our data sets relatively far quicker than we expected. So the plan, we get asked for a lot of, can you do this sign language? Can you do that sign language? We're really focusing on getting British Sign Language, accurate and elegant. And then when we've got British Sign Language, then we're going to move on to do other sign languages. But I think the size of the task that it looked like a few years ago, it's not as big as it looks like now.
Yeah, it's very important work, and it's actually a huge commitment, because I see that it is kind of a custom model in a way, right? You have to work on it and you have to feed it to get great results. So I was wondering, how has been the reception from the users when they test this system? What are their reactions? How is it useful for them in their everyday lives?
Well, in the transport space, it's been incredibly positive, because previously there was nothing there before, which again fits with our ethos of providing translations where none exists. So trains were missed, platforms were missed. Stations, like sometimes trains will like not stop at a station and it's just announced on the tannoy, and people will sit there and not know what's going on, or a train stops because there's maybe like been a bomb threat, and like all the hearing people know what's going on, the deaf person doesn't know what's going on. So we haven't done any bomb threats yet, but like we're able to provide that information that wasn't there previously. We have a product that's on a mobile phone in the transport sector. So people have gone like, it's like having an interpreter in your pocket. So they pick it up and it gives you dynamic live information kind of as it's happening. And that's been something that we're very proud of, really. The ability just to pop it in your pocket and take it out when you need it is quite exciting.
Wonderful. I imagine that this wasn't even a thought like 10 years ago or even 5 years ago for some of these people, right?
And the feedback there is like it's a real person. We said no, it's not. It's AI. So the feedback from the transport sector has been fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So would you say, apart from this, do you have any other case studies or cases in which technology has greatly impacted accessibility in the last few years? Have you seen any other great improvement similar to this one in transportation that you can tell us about?
Do you mean for our product? Or if someone says like, what's your ideal client? I'd say it was CVG Airport, Cincinnati Airport, because they've just been a very early champion. And we say we're sort of born in CVG is our sort of tagline, but they just got it really quickly, and they just got that it could be simple. So they started out with something very, very simple, not complex, didn't need lots of stakeholders to buy into it, but just said, look, let's just get this set up and running. Once they started showing it, it got great feedback, and then they moved on to phase 2. It was relatively simple and relatively easy to do, and then they moved on to phase 3, which was at all the boarding gates, which was more complex, but by the time we got there, people were used to it and liked it and were starting to talk about it. And I just think that ability just to say, let's just get something started, is something that should be sort of celebrated in companies.
How many countries are you incorporating this technology in? Because you mentioned the UK, you have mentioned the US. Is there any other spaces where people who speak VSL are using your products? Any other countries, any other user spaces? I don't know.
So we have, most of our work comes from the UK or America, but we have countries like based in India that are global, that have a global workforce, and they want to give access to their training manuals or their health and safety manuals to their staff, and their staff use American Sign Language. So if that's the case, the company is actually based in India, so it's kind of like probably 10% of our client base is based outside the UK and America. So.
Interesting.
Do you plan to add more sign languages, like more regional variants or other countries?
Yeah, we need to get British Sign Language right first, and then when we've got the recipe right for that, then we can roll it out. So we'll be looking at a sort of a business model that possibly includes a licensing model to other countries. Like, we think that the best people to work in other countries might be sort of based in that country. So we're looking at a licensing model, or when people just buy our software from the UK and New Zealand. We don't know yet. It's all up for grabs.
Yeah, so we will stay in touch for the moment when you are, happy about the British Sign Language and you want to go to the Czech Republic.
Yes, definitely.
You're already mentioning so many promising projects, Sally, but I was wondering if you have any future project that you're actually working on right now, apart from the perfectioning of your VSL database. Is there something you're very excited to develop right now? Any technology you're looking forward to?
No, we're focusing very much. I've always been a really big fan of focus, because whenever you work with a group of people, there were people that go, what about this and what about that, and we should be doing this and we should be doing that, and no, they didn't like this. And I think it's really important as a business leader to just focus. So we're saying no to a lot of things at the moment. Kind of, it's a weird note to end the podcast, but it's like.
That's actually very wise. I agree. I was just wondering, there's so much AI buzz around us, and the models change all the time, and we are talking about AI all the time. So how does that affect you in the day-to-day work of developing this product? Because in the end, AI is changing all the time, and I don't know if that affects your product and your custom models in a regular basis.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we started, we were like, we're going to need 250,000 sentence pairs, 250,000 data sets to develop a language model. And then ChatGPT, OpenAI came along, and that changed quite dramatically and sped everything up quite dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what the next step will be. It feels like the whole world's getting used to large language models, and also working out when they're used for good and when they're not used for good, and how to regulate around the less good applications. So it feels like we're in a state of flux at the moment, and when that happens, I'd just like to take a little step back and just watch and wait, really.
Yeah, the trends move too fast, and there's still so much to see how we evolved.
It's moving very fast as well, and politically things are moving very fast as well. You know, the political environment sort of 10 years ago was much more positive than it is now. So there's those changes as well are happening. So I'm just watching and waiting.
Well, you mentioned that you are very optimistic about the future. What are you expecting to see for accessibility, for the evolution of accessibility in the next decade or the next 5 years, if you don't want to go that far?
That's a really good question. I think from my company's point of view, the way that captioning, it's quite a prosaic answer to this, but the way captioning is used, when it first came to the market, it was 94% efficient. And now you look at certain TV platforms, the quality of the automatic captioning there is just beautiful and elegant, and it's a joy to watch captions on some platforms now. That's where I'd like our product to kind of move towards, is from something that's good enough and understandable to something that's elegant and that you can't tell a difference, and is available kind of across all media platforms, so that people can have an interface where they can click on and off for sign language with 100% content translated. So at the moment, 5% is mandated, and broadcasters are struggling to meet 5%. So it's kind of like my target, 100% across broadcast platforms would be a great achievement, really.
Yeah, that looks like a great objective. Vasek, how do you see it from your point of view? How do you imagine the future for accessibility?
Like how do I imagine the future of sign language or accessibility in general in next decade? Yeah, I can imagine that you visit the doctor and she's maybe wearing normal glasses or almost normal glasses, and the deaf person communicated with him also have these glasses, and while the doctor speaks, the other person can see it translated in real time in the glasses, and of course, contrary, when the person is signing, it's automatically translated to spoken language. That would be amazing, and I believe that it could be a very needed component to overcome this attitude problem, because it would be more natural for each person to communicate with their own language. But it's kind of like a sci-fi now. But yeah, I'm really willing to see something like that, and I would also like to see more improvement in translation in general, because even with AI and large language models, translation is still complicated, and it's really sometimes extremely inaccurate for some specific communication. Like you don't want to go to a doctor with Google Translate today, because you could end up with a completely different diagnosis when if you go there with the human interpreters. So this is something that some progress is definitely still needed.
But I think, I mean, there's a lot of medical terminology that's quite hard to understand. One of the things we're working on is translating that medical terminology into sign language. So I think it does have a place in the healthcare sector, but more for information giving about what does this mean, rather than which leg am I going to chop off. I think it does have a place.
It's just for some fields like healthcare, of course, finance. Those are where risk is high, so you need to be completely sure to understand perfectly what the message is.
Absolutely.
So guys, we have reached the end of the episode. I wanted to ask Sally, lastly, how can we get in touch with what Signapse does, and how we can stay in touch and with your work?
So we're releasing new product updates every 2 weeks. We're working in 2-week sprints. We're working very fast at the moment. So a lot of changes to functionality are being added to our website. So you could look at our website. I think we're pretty easy to find if you put our name in. And we're very lively on LinkedIn as well. So if you follow me or follow my company on LinkedIn, then again, all the updates are on there. We post about 2-3 times a week. We stay away from Twitter, and we think that we might be moving away from Twitter and onto Blue Sky. So
yeah, okay, we will keep an eye on that. Václav, where can we find you online?
Me online? You can find us on localazy.com and on LinkedIn, Twitter, or X as it's called today, and I believe other places. So definitely come to check how you can improve your product with more languages.
Everyone still calls it Twitter.
Yeah. The branding hasn't been good. So guys, thank you so much for being here with me talking about accessibility and localization. And to the audience, see you in the next episode of Bridging the Gap. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
If you like this episode, please follow our channel and add it to your favorites so you don't miss the next conversation. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates and bonus content. Until next time, stay curious.